You need all this. You need this layering.
Welcome back, everybody, to Pastel with Avon. I'll be using two wet pastel techniques today, one for the underpainting and one for the middle painting. But today's purpose, today's goal is to get you to understand how layering can make a painting more interesting. We're going to get past the block-in stage and we're going to start making smaller shapes, and we're going to start to show you how multiple layers and thinking ahead is really, really important. You've got to experiment on your own. If you don't know color theory, then I will talk about ways that you can develop your sense of color so you can start thinking ahead. Thinking ahead, layering, whether it's with texture like I use, or whether it's with mark making and using the pastel as a painter would with brush strokes. Both of those things you have to layer in. So let's get started. Those that have watched my channel before know that I like to either take photographs or do plein air studies. These are the studies I've decided to use for this example today. You can see the diagonal going across underneath the tree line. That creates a smaller shape in the lower right hand and a larger shape that mirrors it in the left. So we're creating with that diagonal a great compositional design going with the 2/3, 1/3. Another compositional element out of this, you'll see that the trees themselves create a large mass. These two drawings are similar, but they don't have that diagonal that's as sharp in the other. You can see the one on the left creates this large dark mass. When you squint at least 2/3 of it, if not 75% of it, is a dark mass with a light area. So automatically, diagonal element creates some movement that the other two didn't, and we maintain that light behind this large mass. So this is exactly the sort of thing where you combine two compositional elements to create a picture design that is appealing. And I'm going to use my color wheel to create my color selection. I may look in my stolen color box, but earlier this week I painted this and I'm really liking it. It's unusual. Usually my reds and my oranges are more brilliant, but I like the way that these are on the more peachy side. They're almost salmon colored as opposed to red and red oranges that have been more brilliant in some of my other pieces I've done before. So I'm thinking about trying to see if I can adopt some of these colors in today's piece. This is a 12 by 12 hardwood panel coated with white gesso, then clear gesso. Clear gesso gives me the tooth I need in order to make the charcoal and pastel stick. Okay, now I'm going to transfer that diagonal from the drawing that you saw onto here, and I'm going to use charcoal, and I will use wet techniques to firm up the charcoal and the dark areas. This triangle down here has a little modulation in it, right down in here. There's a secondary wedge in here. Let me go ahead and get this blocked in, and then we'll move forward to how I wet this charcoal. Putting in a few of these little place markers, changing some of the angles here a little bit from the drawing, but you can get a feel for how I've got this. When you squint at this, you'll see how once I wet this will become right through here about a 70-75% dark mass and a light mass. Now here's our 1/3. So I'm going to try to leave a little area here so I can get a little more a sense of that light coming in behind this tree, but keep it in an area that's of interest. It's okay, you don't have to be right on the 1/3 mark. It's just you don't want to be way on this edge or you don't want to be close to the center. So if I get that light somewhere in here or along this edge, then I'm going to be still compositionally true to a picture design that uses the large mass. The large mass is from Edward Payne. So if you ever get a chance to get Edward Payne's landscape composition book, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But I name these compositions that are tried and true, used by artists through the years. Standing back, I see, trying to not make everything straight up and down. I got everything going at an angle, so it looks like the picture's cockeyed. So I'll probably, as I paint this, move some of these pieces here and there more vertical, so it doesn't look like I accidentally made these things, you know, I want them to kind of lean out, so maybe I need to curve them a little bit more in a few places and have some verticals and some opposite directions in others. That's already starting to look more interesting. But this will all disappear, and you'll see why once I add alcohol to this charcoal. Now I'm just black and white. I'm what they call a no-tan. I've got a little distant horizon, which was not in my drawing, but I'm going to try to use some of these darks to gray up some of these areas in here and just keep this light. I'll start to add middle grays as I add alcohol to darken up some of these areas, and then use just some of that on my brush to make these middle grays. The next step is to come into these charcoals and wet them. This helps set the charcoal a little bit, but there'll still be a little dust left. And what we'll get out of that dust is it'll mix with the pastels. And when you mix a black with a hue, you get a shade. Let me fast forward here. You can get the process, and I'll stop every now and then and tell you when I'm changing something. This is just a matter of getting this alcohol wet and pushed around and sealed. Okay, now watch what happens when I wet these dark areas, and then while charcoal's on my brush, I come into the whites. I'm creating the middle grays I talked about. The goal here is to try to get, just like my drawings, try to get some darks and some lights, create middle grays, so I have a value study in here. Now I'm leaving this light, but I want that horizon back there to fade away. And we'll lighten up this field probably with some brighter hues. I'm going to grab some more of this. I grabbed too much there, it made a light spot. But I want this corner and this top of the sky to be just a little bit darker gray value than, see there, when you take too much away, you got to fill it back in sometimes. So the goal here is not a perfect, perfect underpainting, it's just a guide. Now we're at the stage after the alcohol is dried to start adding some color hues. So what is the opposite of orange? It's blue, pale blue, a little bit of violet up in here, and it becomes an underpainting. We'll mix with the orange and give us a little bit of a gray orange. A lot of you have seen, I'm a fan of putting place setters in, so I'm going to get a little of this bright yellow in there, this pale yellow. It kind of helps as I progress with the colors to remember to leave some of those light areas. They're not balanced, they're not light enough the way they need to be, but that's not the goal at this point. You're just working in broad open areas. Now we'll stick that yellow over that blue and blue-violet, and look at that. I get that orange over it. I'm sorry, I said yellow. And look at that. Look at that, man. We are getting that peachy color that I was after. But it's toned down. This is really, really bright, but it's toned down by adding those undercolors. This is a really bright lime green, but it will tone down. I just need to get that in there for right now. Again, that's kind of a place setter. These trees will appear way too dark. I've got kind of a blue, it's actually a blue-red violet, or blue-violet, sorry. And I'll fill these dark areas in, not pressing hard. I just want, because it's mixing with that charcoal, I just want enough that when I use my wet techniques, it will fill in these spaces.
That's all I'm looking for at this point. Just keep it broad, keep it open. Just a rough idea of what we're looking for. This isn't the final color, it's just, again, a little bit of a place setter back in there for that tree line way off in the distance beyond this open pasture or meadow. My favorite things, the chip brushes from the hardware store, 69 cents and less than $1 for the bigger ones, and a little clear gesso. I'm going to go use this and go over this. I am starting with the lights first because the colors will bleed in and make these lights a little muddy if I start with the darks. The only other way to do this is have multiple brushes. By using these chip brushes, I get some nice textures. I'm also painting in the direction that some of the pastel brush strokes will go. So I'm establishing where some highlights might end up, and these little ridges created by the brush will create nice little highlights as this painting progresses. I almost got into that tree line back there, so you got to really pay attention to what you're doing. But once the stuff's wet, you can start modulating some of those values. Now these darken up, but they'll dry with this clear gesso. I'm fixing the color. If you don't like texture, then you can fix these colors on with a workable fixative or something like that. But I like the texture by fixing this on with clear gesso. So if you're not ready for the heavy texture work that I am doing, then by all means switch to using spray fixatives. Some of my favorites are, especially if you've got clear gesso on the board with the pumice in it, Spectrafix is a great one for this. But any spray fixative, Spectrafix is a pump spray, so you don't get some of the obnoxious fumes that you do with drawing fixatives. All right, let me just finish this up. We'll fast forward some of this because look at this, the grass in between trees has light coming through it, so I'm able to either go up or go down, and I tone down some of that area that's back in there. Now I want this to be a little more blocked in than the drawing was, so I'm not going to let that fill. As you can see, we're getting more color. We still don't have these peaches and salmon colors down in here, but I'm laying in the dark colors. Every time think of the painting as being a silhouette at this point, and now you have to fill in all those little highlights. Well, the more you fill in, the more we go from something dark to something light. But every skip and jump in the future is going to show those little leaves that are in shade and shadow underneath. So by controlling in the future application of my colors, by controlling the pressure, I am going to let some of these darks show through even in some of the highlights. Okay, let's get to taking a look at how our no-tan small thumbnail sketch compares to our rough underpainting with blocked in areas. As you can see, we have the diagonal going on and we have the large shapes. I still have issues with those tree trunks being too one-dimensional. By adding that tree line in the back, which is not in the sketch, it doesn't make it look like these trees are falling off the hillside into oblivion. The sketch only takes us so far. We have to use our judgment to fill in some of the spaces that make it read more as a landscape. The goal now is to start to get some of the finished colors in the palette that I selected into here. So I'm going to work from the darks to the light, and anything I'm putting in here now is very light. I'm not pressing hard. I'm letting that texture. Now, if you didn't add that texture, you need to be using your mark making, but because The texture allows me to use the side of a pastel, yet do all these neat little areas where some of the dark is showing through. I'm just trying to get some additional color in there. Now look at this. This is a tint of an orange, and by going over that, I am getting knocking down that bright green, but I'm also able to start to marry these two. We'll get some of this color up in here too. This is our 1/3 mark right in here, so we might get some color up in there. Start to lighten it up with this. Just like when we create a gray by putting a complement on the gray, we can make a gray out of orange and blue. And if we put more blue in, we'll have a blue bias gray. If we put more orange in, we'll have an orange or a yellow bias gray. So it's kind of, you can still see I've got that green in there, but as I work more of these colors into here, I'll be able to start to bring that salmon color out. I have a lot of people who see this layering, they say, well, why don't you just pick a color that's that color first? Well, I could do that, but I wouldn't get all these little vibrations. When you look at this painting in person, there's all sorts of little vibrations that go on. Dig out my video on using white, the forbidden white, and you'll see how white underneath colors applied over. In that video, you'll see how they vibrate so much more or have a higher brilliance when you scumble over these colors into those areas. So that's why I don't just, well, this is the color I want, why don't I just pick it? You need all this, you need this layering and the texturing in order to make this interesting. Otherwise it becomes just a very flat shape. Using texture is all about how the pressure you apply, but just because I'm using this texture, if you sprayed yours, then you're going to get a different look. You're going to be relying on the marks, the mark making to tell the story. Same pastel, same color, but look at that. Just by varying the pressure, and I can go over that, it looks so much darker than it does in here because I'm using oranges to make this peach. What I have here is, it looks like it's brown, but it's a red brown. And red is a member of that orange family. I think that can knock down some of those dark areas and actually bring their values up a little bit visually. The actual value isn't coming out if you turn this thing to gray. But getting that red in there and putting an orange over it, again, play with your colors. Make little color squares and put one color down and then see what the other color over it does. That's the easiest way to learn how to think ahead in layering. This is an orange. It's a giraffe color. And because I have that green and blue-green back there, and I have some violets and blues, I'm going to put this on there right now, but then I'm going to go back over it. Again, I'm thinking ahead. I'm going to go back over it with a color that is going to be more suitable for trees off in the distance. But look how already I'm adding that little bit of orange to some of this is preparing for the colors that go over the top. And now I'm thinking about where the light is hitting these branches. Remember earlier we talked about how those brush strokes would create little layers you could follow, a little ghost. That's what I'm doing now. I'm leaving more of these darks. At some point we'll do some blending because I'll have a lot of patchy areas. I'm thinking about this tree overlapping that one and the light hitting the top edges of this tree more than the light that's not getting underneath that branch hanging out. And these branches on this tree hanging over in layers. the tree trunk will come more forward. And they're all in a line right now, so I have to pick out which trees are in front of one another in this fence row. But I'm thinking about that as I put these colors over and I create these trees being layered over one another. When I do this, I'm just trying to blend. I'm not pressing hard. I don't want, if I pressed hard, I would just end up with large shapes again. And the goal here is to start to blend some of these layers that I thought about as I picked out my colors. But look, already we're starting to get some of those little bunches of branches in there. Controlling the pressure by controlling the color, we're starting to break this giant shape up into layers of branches, some of them being hit by more light than other light. And that's what this process is. It's a gradual building process. Just the same as if I was an oil painter, because I once was an oil painter, I would be going from a wash, starting to firm up the shapes that the wash would be nothing but our big shapes that you saw me have here. And I would start to firm up some of those shapes and break them up with small brush strokes as I start to add color. This is a magenta, and this magenta works really well. Magenta is a form of red. Again, now I'm working more towards an analogous palette. Once I start getting those peaches that I want, this magenta, these greens in here are going to knock down and gray out some of those stronger greens that we started with. Now that magenta is bleeding through in those skips and jumps. These two pastels are making that salmon that I'm looking for. Neither one of them individually works in the painting. And the underlaying colors, it's the same pastel. The underlaying colors create the separation in values and shapes. I want to reestablish my lights in here. Before we're done, we might even have the edge of a light source back there, who knows. Now I'm coming back in here with this violet. The violet has blue in it. We've got some oranges and peaches in there, and look, we're getting a nice gray, blue violet for something that's off in the distance. That's the process from this point on, is we're narrowing the size down a little bit. And again, I can't stress enough that you guys take a piece of paper and just make little squares of color and start adding colors on top and see how your colors react. That's part of learning the color theory. I mean, it's one thing to say, this is the opposite of blue and oranges or complements or whatever. It's another thing to see and feel how much pressure it takes to mix these colors. Look, I've got all those layers showing through. If I just had a color that was just right, I wouldn't get near as much interest. If somebody looks at the painting and first of all the painting gets them to stop. Then they start studying it. Some museums have where you look at a painting for an hour. Well, there's some artists and critics that look at them for multiple hours. And it's only through that looking process that we start to see these subtleties that the artist, in this case me, is trying to get the viewer to stop and look how interesting this is. I'm thinking again, I'm always thinking in terms of those little smaller shapes and the layers that I'm able to create. Okay, you've seen me get deeper into the middle of the painting, and towards the end here you can see I'm starting to put in, this is a yellow that is very intense in pigment, and look what happens when I put it against those grays I created. Look how that thing just pops right out of there. It could be the rim light around the edges of a branch of a tree, it could be the light source itself shining through the trees, but it all had to do, it would not pop like that if I did not create these little gray areas. The texture is now letting me drag that up through there, and it's creating a sense of backlighting. All right, I'm going to just carry on. We won't get it all done today on camera. This is the kind of piece that I'll stick on my wall and try to look at and make adjustments for the next week or two. But so for now, thanks for following along. Happy painting, everybody. Enjoy. Bye-bye.